Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Prodigy Season 1, Episode 16, Preludes. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Prodigy, so I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for Star Trek Prodigy up to Season 1, Episode 16. If you have not seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, So this episode is basically just telling us the backstories of the various characters, the ones that we didn't really know about. And it was kind of, a nice little episode. Was some bonding with the crew going on, and you get to learn a bit more about the characters. However, the important piece of information is when we see the new character who's the same species as the Diviner, who is apparently called the Vindicator. They have these really grandiose names, but anyway, apparently it's not their actual names. This is what they started calling themselves when they traveled back in time, apparently. But anyway, the Vindicator, who is posing as that Trill ensign, tells the Diviner the backstory of what actually happened, because he conveniently lost his memory so that the audience can hear this backstory. That we got some really important information from that storyline, but the rest was just basically some nice little fill-in of what some of the backstories of the other various characters. So it was okay, I guess. Yeah, I don't know, but let me start with the Vindicator one, because that's the important thing. So we learn what happened to Chicote, because this was a big mystery throughout this season. We got glimpses of Chicote in the first half with the record of the protostar. It was like buried deep in the protostar of God, what are those things called? Dreadnoughts coming on board and attacking Chicote, and we never really knew what happened to him. Like, I kind of assumed that the Diviner had captured him and was holding him prisoner, but now we have the full backstory. So in the mid-season finale, we got the backstory of the Diviner being from the future, and that his Starfleet apparently was introduced to his planet, and they went into civil war, and so he's on a mission to travel back in time to destroy Starfleet before Starfleet ever makes first contact with his species. But here we get more information where apparently Chicote, while on his mission with the protostar, accidentally traveled into the future, went through a temporal anomaly, and ended up on their planet in the future. And so after the world had been destroyed, that's how they got access to the protostar, is that it accidentally appeared. And apparently they deduced that it was from the past, and so they captured it, and they captured Chicote and his crew, and had plans to, I guess they could figure out how to use the same temporal anomaly as Chicote did. I was a bit fuzzy on that. But anyway, they came up with this plan they created this weapon that would destroy Starfleet, and they had plans to travel back in the past and use the protostar to destroy Starfleet. However, Chicote and his crew apparently broke free and sent the protostar into the past by itself with no one on board to try to hide it from these people. And so then they went on this holy mission where they gave themselves pretentious names and went to try to find the protostar and complete this mission. So now we know that Chicote, what happened to Chicote, at least. I mean, as far as we know, there could be more to the story we haven't learned yet, but as far as we know, he's in the future and being held prisoner and this planet. which is yeah. So it does make me wonder how they're going to be able to get him back, rescue him. I would hope so. But yeah, so as far as there could have been more to the story that they haven't told us yet. Maybe he broke free and traveled to the past themselves. Maybe these people did something else with him. But as far as we know, he's being held captive in the future. So that's interesting to hear. And of course, the diviner apparently landed in the Delta Quadrant and somehow did in fact find the protostar. And I think they were, if I recall, the first half of season 1, he knew it was on the planet but didn't really know how to access it. Because otherwise, if he didn't know where it was just a coincidence it happened to be on the same planet he was that would be quite dumb. But I think he knew it was there, but he was trying to find, he was mining all this material to try to get it functional, if I recall, and they couldn't, and they got it functional just in time for the kids to steal it. If I recall. So it was there, he knew it was there, he just couldn't get it to work, if I remember correctly. So, and the diviner, traveled back in time 20 years ago. So he'd been there for 20 years, whereas the Vindicator had only traveled back in time 3 years ago. And so that's why she was like, if you can imagine, we used to be the same age. But he's a lot older now because he'd been there for 20 years and she'd only been there for 3 years, which is kind of interesting. And apparently he said that he created, she's like, he wasn't really supposed to create a progeny, but he did it on his own because he was worried he wouldn't live long enough to complete the mission. And then she asked, why did the progeny betray you? And she's like, well, she met a boy. Is that really accurate? I don't think so. I don't think it is. Here's the thing. The thing about Gwen, and this is actually kind of doesn't make any sense, that Gwen, I guess it might have been the diviner's fault for not really explaining things to her, and I don't know why he wouldn't simply tell her their background, why he held this information from her, but Gwen grew up a good person, which makes no sense that she grew up being in charge of a slaving colony where they hired these thugs, Kazon thugs, to abduct people and force them into slavery, and she was in charge of that. I don't know how it is that she grew up becoming a really good person who hated that, yet she was still actively participating in it. And not that it's not possible. It is possible for some kids to rebel against their parents and realize what their parents are doing is wrong. But normally, that kind of evilness, a hatred or bigotry or whatever you want to call it, is usually just blindly inherited by their offspring. I don't know. I'm not saying it's a plot hole or outside of the realm of possibility. It just seems weird to me. It seems like I wish we would have actually got a Gwen backstory in this episode to explain why it is she turned out so different from the diviner. Maybe that's coming. Maybe they'll do that eventually. But yeah, it wasn't because of a boy, because I assume he's talking about Doll, and Doll didn't really do much to change her mind. She was already a good person. You could tell that. So, unless he's talking about someone else who we don't know, but, it seems a bit weird, but anyway, this whole backstory, I don't know how I feel about it. It's a cartoon, so I'm just going to go with it because after the past couple episodes, I learned to just not overthink Prodigy and just be like, yeah, whatever. It's just a silly cartoon, which is a shame because I can only like it so much if it's just a silly cartoon, but that's what it's proving to me, so anyway. But yeah, if I do think about it, it reminds me a bit too much of Nero's story from Star Trek 2009, that abomination of a garbage dumpster fire, where, and Nero is easily the worst villain ever in the entire Star Trek franchise, and so I don't like being reminded of Nero, but it does remind me a bit of Nero, of how his storyline doesn't make any sense. And I think it's the same people with this diviner species. Why? Because, alright, let me explain this comparison. So Nero travels back in time. Instead of trying to save Romulus from being destroyed, he goes around and tries to wipe out the Federation, which doesn't make any sense. Why? And it's because his wife died, so why doesn't he try to save his wife's life? Why doesn't he try to warn Romulus? That would make more sense. Kind of the same thing here. Why are they so bent on destroying Starfleet and the Federation when they could actually, if they have access to time travel, why not use it to go directly to their race and stop them from, destroying themselves in civil war? It seems like, and especially when they lost the Protostar, and it seemed like it would be impossible for them to find this Protostar. Why not just, hey, why don't we just travel back 10 years and tell our species, hey, let's not do a stupid civil war. Let's stop the civil war from happening. But instead, no, it has to be relevant to the show, so they have to make him want to destroy Starfleet. So it seems flimsy to me in the same way Nero's storyline was flimsy. And it also reminds me a bit of that episode Friendship 1 from Voyager, which I also didn't like. It was hugely flawed. In that episode, the Earth had apparently sent out this probe many centuries ago, and this race of aliens discovered it. And the probe gave them the instructions on how to create matter and antimatter, and they used it to destroy themselves and destroy the whole planet. And then they blamed Starfleet, so when Voyager showed up, they held them hostage and considered them conquerors and saying, you did this to us. Which, there was an extreme lack of self-responsibility, of taking responsibility for one's own actions. Actually, no. The Earth probe did not do this to you. You did it to yourselves. You fucked yourselves up by destroying your own selves, and you're placing the blame entirely on these other people. Now, granted, they shouldn't have given you the means, but it seems to me they would have found some other way to destroy themselves, that they're so irresponsible. They have no sense of self-responsibility. And it's kind of the same thing here with these progenies. Or not progeny, the diviner and the vindicator species. I can't remember what they're called, but it's the same. They're kind of doing the same thing. They got no sense of self-responsibility. Like, they didn't, to be fair, they didn't really explain very much why. Just because they met Starfleet, why all of a sudden that caused a civil war that destroyed their world. It seems like the fault was their own. Like, maybe they were going to fight a civil war over anything. Maybe if Starfleet had never arrived, they still would have fought a civil war. Maybe the civil war was brewing, and maybe it had nothing to do with Starfleet. They have no sense of self-responsibility. Instead, they're putting the blame on someone else. And I do wonder if that's how this show is going to resolve eventually. If that eventually they're going to reveal that the Diviner and the Vindicator succeed in destroying Starfleet, and they travel back to the future and find that the world's destroyed anyway because there's going to be a civil war anyway, and it actually had nothing to do with Starfleet, and so then they had to travel back in time and save Starfleet and find some other way to save. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here, but I don't really like how they're kind of ignorant and putting all their blames on Starfleet when it's kind of their own damn fault, and they should take some self-responsibility. But anyway, so yeah, those are the issues I had with the backstory. But as I said, I'm not like bothered too much about it because I don't really take the show that seriously anymore. So, alright, and then I guess there was also the ending where Janeway walked in on the Vindicator. Why is the Vindicator just standing there in, her true species, whatever they're called, form, with the Dreadnought, when she could easily be discovered by Janeway? That's goofy. But again, this is a silly cartoon I'm not taking seriously, so whatever. We'll see what happens next. And then, so as I said, the storyline on the Protostar with Dahl and his crew and I do think it makes sense that Dahl would still be very upset over the finding out that he was just a genetic experiment. And I like how he even points out, it's like, oh, you expect me to forget in a day that I'm just some failed experiment? And it makes sense, and I'm glad they touch on it, and I'm glad they show this revelation has repercussions for him. And it's kind of nice how they just sit around telling, like, backstories of how they ended up in that prison. But, to be honest, none of these backstories are really that interesting. Like, Rocktop's ones was kind of goofy. Again, it fit a cartoon where she's, has this arrangement with this dude where they fight and she plays the monster and she lets him beat him every night and he feeds her. But it was kind of predictable. Kind of saw where it was going, that she would eventually get sick of being beaten, so decides to beat him, and he's not on board with that and thinks that she's useless now, and so sells her into slavery. Which is, the guy's a total asshole. It reminds me a lot of classic cartoons that are like similar. So it was okay, I guess, but now the thing I'm wondering is, how did Rocktop end up with that dude in the first place? Why wasn't she on her planet? I don't know. Maybe they'll mention that, maybe not. And then Zero's backstory there wasn't really anything to it. Zero is just wandering around as a, Medusan in the blob form or whatever, in the light form with all the other Medusans. She's like, oh, we're exploring the galaxy. How did they were just wandering around this planet. Like, how did they space travel? How did they get to the Delta Quadrant? I don't know. And then so they're just chilling out, and then the Kazon showed up, captured him, and delivered them to Gwen. That's it. So there wasn't much to that backstory. And then Jacob Pod's backstory, this is kind of a prequel-itis thing where they try to come up with an explanation to explain a character trait that actually doesn't need to be explained, like why he constantly refers to himself in the third person. So they came up with this stupid backstory of this dumb robot on the ship that he's in that always makes him say his name first. It's like, state your name and your query, which doesn't make sense. Like, why is the robot set up like that? Why would the robot need them to repeatedly state his name over and over again? And that's why he always refers to himself in the third person and says, Jacob Pod can fix it. Like, that annoyed me a bit, if I'm being honest. And the story itself was really cartoonish and silly. Again, it's a cartoon. It is a cartoon, so that's fine. But so it fits that it's cartoonish and silly. And I've established this is just a silly cartoon that I'm not taking too seriously. But yeah, so Jacob Pod going around fixing the ship and fixing... Like, why does he need to fix the toilet if everyone's in hypersleep? Like, why doesn't he just go back to... that part I don't get. And why doesn't he just fix the oxygen, but instead he just gives up and leaves the ship instead? I don't know. If you try to think about the storyline, it doesn't really make any sense, but I guess you're not meant to think about it. It's just a stupid, silly storyline. And again, it doesn't really make sense why he would leave the ship. I don't know. But, it was, as I said, it was a nice sort of the crew gathering and talking as they're repairing the drive with this sense of thing. But the backstories were really not that interesting. The only really good, interesting piece of backstory was, again, the one from the Vindicator, where we get revelations on what happened to Chicote. But again, I had a lot of issues with that. So anyway, my rating for Preludes out of 10 is going to be a 6. Good. A decent episode, as I said. As I said, I'm not taking the show too seriously, so it doesn't, some of the flaws don't bother me as much anymore. Yeah, it was fine. It was, as I said, it was heartwarming to have them sitting around telling stories about themselves, and it was interesting getting this backstory, even though it reminded me of lesser Star Trek projects with some of the issues it had. But yeah, it was fine. So anyway, that's it for my review of this latest episode of Prodigy. I shall return next week, hopefully. I will be in New Zealand for the next couple of weeks. I plan to continue reviewing Prodigy while I'm there, but maybe that might not be the case. Maybe I won't be able to. I'm not sure. So if you don't see me again for Prodigy for a couple of weeks, I might retroactively review all the episodes I missed when I was in New Zealand when I get back from New Zealand, or I might do it while I'm over there. I'm not sure about that yet. We'll see what the plan is. Anyway, you can be sure to check out my channel as I continue to cover Star Trek the original series and many other Star Trek videos and random other videos as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.